So one can develop ADHD with age?
Absolutely. So ADHD, we often think that it's just younger, in students or younger kids that it comes about. We're seeing an epidemic of ADHD diagnosis in older adults, even people into 50s and 60s.
Is it because of short format content?
A lot has to do with our exposure to social media. Our attention span has just gotten shorter. The way our brain is being wired is changing so rapidly. So we're encountering this diagnosis at literally any age now.
So it's literally like Instagram and YouTube usage in some form is degrading your brain a little bit.
Yes.
In saying that, of course, there's reading material on Instagram, long form videos on YouTube like this. So I think the practical input here is choose your content and your social media usage carefully.
Absolutely. Because you want to flex your brain muscle, right? So if you just focus on short content, quick hits, your brain gets used to that. Versus if you also focus on long form content, also reading books, other ways of absorbing knowledge, you keep your brain healthy and flexible.
Okay, we'll come back to the Vegas now, but let's talk about short form content a little bit. This is a conversation I have with my girlfriend a lot. We feel that short form content affects our relationship badly because we're both on it, and this is not just us. This is a lot of young couples.
Yes.
But also, it definitely makes you irritable if you do it too much.
Yes.
I personally am a short form content creator, but I feel you should use it in two ways primarily. The first way is to carefully curate your short form feed. And the second is to limit the time you're using it for by catching yourself when you're going down that infinite scrolling trail. You need to understand that you're getting addicted to that dopamine hit that's being
Yes.
generated through short form content. And we have a doctor with us. She says that your brain degrades through short form content.
Yes.
That's true.
It's so addicting. That's why we do it, right? We want more and more. So I think the strategy is limit it so that your brain doesn't become so numb to it, so used to it, that it just needs more and more dopamine from it. And find other ways of getting that dopamine hit. If we just rely on social media to do that for us, it's not going to work. That's why, enjoying joy, bringing joy and pleasure through other activities, through interacting with people, reading a book, listening to music, dancing, exercise. There's so many other ways you can get that dopamine hit. So you need to balance the two.
Can we actually slow down the conversation a little bit and enter this world of dopamine as well as short form content? I'd love for you to begin by explaining what dopamine is, and then let's talk about social media usage with respect to dopamine in detail
Yes.
and the solutions.
So dopamine is a little chemical in the brain that tells your brain, I like this. I want more of this. So the reason why we love dopamine is because that was so important for our survival. So when we were cavemen and women, when I ate something that was high in sugar, it was good for my body, right? It's good for my survival. So the brain says, this I love. You need to do more and more. And that expands to so many other things, such as not just food, but even things like sex, right? And even things that we view, such as short form content on social media. All of that our brain likes and wants more and more of it. The problem is the more you give it, right, the more exposure you have to these things, it resets your set point. So now you need to have even more to have the same effect. So that's where the addiction comes in.
So you're basically saying that you do a new activity, you're able to create this volcano of dopamine in your head. You do that for a week. Every day in that week, you might feel a volcano of dopamine. But on the 8th or 9th day, you may not feel it.
Yes.
And therefore, you'll have to do more of that activity to feel that same level of the volcanic eruption of dopamine. Right?
Exactly. We have to just maintain that level. It's almost like a race, right? You have to keep up with it. That's why it's so important to take breaks. Social media breaks, limit your exposure to things so your body has the ability to reset your dopamine levels. So you don't get addicted. You still get that nice dopamine hit, but you're not chasing after it where you want more and more exposure. And not only that, when you do that, your brain wiring also changes over time.
Okay, wow. You'll have to get into this a little bit.
So what happens is when we are addicted to something and dopamine becomes scarce, because like I said, for the same amount of exposure, whether it's if I'm spending 10 minutes on social media, it gives me X amount of dopamine. A month later, 10 minutes of social media was only going to give me half the dopamine. So what your brain does is increases the receptors of dopamine in the brain. So now I need more dopamine more receptors to feed. So you see how this is a vicious cycle. It actually doesn't just have a short-term impact. Long-term impact is that your body becomes almost numb to dopamine, not just from social media, from so many other things. So often people spread that addiction from social media into food. I see this all the time.
I'm so sorry, I have to pause you a little bit because I want to explain what receptors are in the first place. So our body's full of hormones, but for any hormone to work, you need the molecule of the hormone to fit in with its receptor.
It's like a lock and a key, right? Dopamine is the key, receptor is a lock. So if you have more locks to open, you're going to need a lot more keys to match it, right?
So you're saying that if you flood your brain with dopamine through a single activity every day, your brain starts building more dopamine receptors and says, hey, feed me more if you want to unlock the volcanic eruption.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the underlying mechanism by which addiction develops. It's rewiring your brain.
This is any addiction.
Any addiction.
Cigarettes, weed, alcohol.
All works along the same pathway.
Okay. Social media addiction, you'll put into the same category.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And you said that your addiction from one stimulus can spread to the rest of your life as well. Let's break that down from a biological perspective.
Yeah. So think about food. We all love sweets, right? So we love something sugary because it makes us feel good, gives us that little dopamine hit. But if, because of the social media exposure, my brain has rewired and requires a much higher level of dopamine, to get that same joy from the sugary foods, I'm going to have to eat more and more and more. So any addiction I have will be multiplied X number of times because my brain is just not that sensitive to dopamine anymore. So the main thing is, I don't like taking things away from people, especially if you have an addiction and I take that away from you. You're likely to seek that out even more, right? We're like little kids. If I take the candy away, you're going to look for that candy even more so. So the idea is replacing it, is you're not cutting out anything cold turkey, but you're replacing that dopamine hit, the source of that dopamine hit, with something more constructive. Exercise, meditation, art, anything that's going to make you feel good in the long term without compromising your brain health.
You got to go from being a bad girl or a bad boy to a good girl or a good boy.
Exactly. It's a long journey sometimes.
But this is also the process of growing up. Like when you enter your 30s, you shed off a lot of habits, and they could be social habits as well. I actually think one's 30s is a phase of going from being a bad boy or a bad girl to being a good boy or a good girl. Fair to say?
Yeah, because you see the effect it has on your body, your mind, your spiritual health, all of it. And then you cannot help but take notice and change things.